We can start with Secretary Batcher.
Thank Ms.
Oh,
okay.
no.
All right. Thank you.
Unless you have another order that you prefer.
No,
We're flexible.
I thought
Okay.
everyone was going to, the birthday girl was going to go first, but I will begin. Chairs, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. My name is Mary Bell Batcher, and I'm Secretary of Government Operations Agency, which has been in existence just 2 years. Today, I'm excited to talk to you about major initiatives GovOps is undertaking, civil service improvement. Important topic today, obviously. I will provide the committee with an overview of the efforts we are undertaking, and my colleague, the Director of Department of Human Resources, Richard Gillihan, will go into more detail relative to equal opportunity employment and diversity in the state workforce. You will also be hearing from my colleagues today about the state's equal employment opportunity process and changes that have been made and how the administration is incorporating EEO policies and procedures into civil service improvement. As I mentioned at last year's hearing, I am committed, and this administration is committed, to providing equal opportunities for current and prospective state employees. GovOps staff frequently meets with and works on issues with the Civil Rights Coalition. We integrated their requests into the recent CalHR conference to make sure EEO topics were fully covered. They are also participating and contributing to civil service improvement teams that are addressing recruitment issues. One notable example is a joint project we initiated in December with SPB, the Department of Rehabilitation, the Civil Rights Coalition, SEIU Local 1000, and various departments to make meaningful improvements in hiring, retention, and career development for opportunities for persons with disabilities. It is work that is critical to our state government. The governor outlined the problem with our current civil service system in his budget release by saying that, and I quote, "The state's current civil service system is complicated, inflexible, highly bureaucratic set of rules, regulations, and policies that have been slow to adapt to generational and demographic changes in the workforce and to emerging trends in the workplace. In short, we are far from the employer of choice, and we certainly aren't equipped to attract the millennials who will soon make up a majority of our workforce. As the governor also pointed out, this isn't the first effort to update our civil service system. However, it is my goal to make this one meaningful and lasting. Quite frankly, we need to put aside a lot of our preconceived notions and really dig into this issue. We are aiming high and we are working hard. GovOps has undertaken civil service improvement as a collaborative process with CalHR, the State Personnel Board, and the Department of Finance, all of whom are part of our leadership structure along with the governor's office. We are going to be tackling some big issues. That means thinking about our employees, how we recruit, we retain, develop, and compensate them. And at the same time, we are focused on updating our strategic planning and performance management. To start, GovOps reviewed 30 years of civil service reform recommendations from the Little Hoover Commission, the Legislative Analyst's Office, the Bureau of State Audits, and the California Performance Review, interviewed top, past, and present HR managers and executives, and created a list of policies, procedures, and rules in need of reform, improvement, and elimination. From this list, 9 work stream areas were developed by subject matter assigned a project manager. The work stream areas are categorized into the following focus areas: recruitment, retention and development, compensation, labor relations, strategic planning, performance management and discipline, and policies. Each work stream contains several different teams consisting of members of diverse backgrounds, including in some cases members of our various labor unions. These 28 teams began working on specific objectives just a few months ago. Moving forward, as the work teams complete their reviews and recommendations, the administration will determine which specific recommendation to pursue and the appropriate venue for each. To the extent statutory changes are necessary, we look forward to working collaboratively with the legislature on implementation. Additionally, we are happy to brief the legislature along the way as we reach various milestones. Although there is good enough reason to improve civil service system, you may be asking, why now? As you will hear and have heard from the panel on succession planning, and approximately 80% of the current state workforce is over the age of 45, which has been stated several times today. And 60% of our colleagues will leave us in the next 5 years due to retirement. In just 10 short years, 75% of our workforce will be entirely made up of millennials. Think about it. In a decade, most of our workforce will have spent their entire lives in the digital world. How they were taught in school, how they entertain themselves, how they communicate through tweets and Instagram and Facebook and BuzzFeed, how they buy their clothes, how they consume their news, all through the internet in an innovative economy. These tax-savvy millennials face a 70-year-old system, which includes applying for a vacancy by mail or dropping off an application and a resume. They haven't done anything like that in their entire lives. So, for purpose of example, let's say that someone takes an exam. I think Mr. Joyne Sawyer was talking about this earlier. Maybe they take that exam online. Maybe not. And they pass and are placed on a list. In order to be interviewed after being placed on a list, you must be reachable. Once you are reachable, you wait for an interview. Maybe weeks, maybe months. Maybe you don't ever hear anything at all. Not a yes, not a no, not even a maybe. Okay, so let's say you make it through the interview and you're selected for a position, which typically takes anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. The person hired, most likely a millennial, is told what their onboarding experience will be. Be at the office at 8 a.m., sit in a cubicle with no natural light, boot up a computer, which is 5 years old, not a tablet, not even a laptop, a computer, and spend the next 3 hours filling out, with pencils, forms. Forms about your benefits, forms about where you want your check to be sent, forms, and more forms. Then when they are done, they walk those forms down to HR so that someone can take that information and eventually key it into data. This process is why we must change the civil service system in order to attract and retain the talent in state government in order to be the employer of choice. California is the 7th largest economy in the world. Our state deserves the best personnel system to help run that economy, and we do this by making sure our civil servants are diverse and representative of who we are as a state. We have much more work to do by encouraging departments to be more inclusive and diverse, particularly in their hiring panels. To that end, I have met with all of my directors and EEO officers and HR staff in the GovOps agency and told them to review their hiring practices. As an employer, we must encourage a more collaborative approach between human resources and EEO officers in our hiring practices. I was so struck by President Obama's remarks in his eulogy for the Senator, the Honorable Reverend Clement Pinckney, who was ruthlessly gunned down in Charleston. The president talked about the system being infected with bias and guarding against not just racial slurs, but we're also guarding against the subtle impulse to call Johnny back for a job interview, but not Jamal. We want California's magnificent blanket of diversity to be reflected in our state workforce. The goal of civil service improvement is to correct a system that makes the state of California the employer of choice, and to build a workforce prepared to meet the challenges our state will face in the future. Again, thank you very much for your time this morning. I'll turn to my colleague now, Richard Gillihan, and we will be happy, of course, to answer your questions.
So good morning, Chairman Bonta and Dr. Pan and members of the respective committees. Richard Gillihan with Cal HR. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. We met last year in July, about 1 year ago today, and I'm happy to be here this morning to provide some updates on what we've been doing at Cal HR in the last year, because we have a lot to be proud of, but we also have much work to do. Just prior to that hearing last year, we released a 5-year strategic plan, something the department was sorely lacking, that provided really the mission, vision, and values for the organization, and we continue to execute that plan and report on our progress. EEO and diversity are foundational principles underlying everything we do. As the plan is over a year old at this point, we're going to spend the summer embarking on a significant update to the plan to incorporate both the civil service improvement initiatives that fall under our purview, as well as incorporating a more heightened focus on the workforce challenges we face today, which I'm going to discuss more in a minute. In December, as the Secretary said, in partnership with the State Personnel Board and the Department of Rehabilitation, we launched a major initiative to improve the state's position as an employer of persons with disabilities. This inclusive project, which includes participants from various departments, the Civil Rights Coalition, the Association of California State Employees with Disabilities, the California Committee on Employment of Persons with Disabilities, the California Civil Rights Officers Council, the Statewide Disability Advisory Council, and our friends in SCIU Local 1000. When I say inclusive, I mean inclusive. It's reviewing the career life cycle of a person with disabilities, not just what we have today, which is sort of the job examination piece. We're actually looking at it from prospective employee to retiree, and along the way, issues about upward mobility and reasonable accommodation and career development and promotional opportunities. In particular, the promise of technology and leveraging that technology, adaptive technologies, to really make a level playing field for all of our job applicants. The project team is currently in the process of refining its recommendations and preparing a report with final proposals. And I would just note that this month marks the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and making the state an open and accessible employer to persons with disabilities remains a top priority for us. In January, the governor's budget highlighted our civil service improvement project, as the Secretary testified, and as noted in our written responses to the committee's questions, CSI is a major initiative for us and will lay the foundation for a modern and effective civil service system to serve the state for decades to come. It's also important to note that the vast majority of staff on these work groups, as well as the project managers themselves, are not CalHR staff. Rather, they are subject matter experts from departments across the state. They're the experts. They know the challenges they face every day, and they're best positioned to provide meaningful insight in how to make improvements. In June, something we're very proud of, we hosted our 2015 CalHR conference. The conference had over 1,000 attendees from the state's HR, EEO, and civil rights community, included 34 individual workshop sessions. In addition to being a showcase for the Civil Service Improvement Project, the conference had a particular focus on EEO and diversity challenges we face and the opportunities before us. These challenges included gender pay gap and underrepresentation in the workforce, particularly in higher earning occupations. That's a challenge for us. Not only did we discuss these issues in an open and honest way, I personally challenge those in attendance to be part of the solution going forward. As I've stated in testimony before the legislature, these challenges were decades in the making and will take time to fully resolve. In addition, we're bound by the state constitution, which prohibits hiring and promotional decisions from being considered, from considering protected characteristics. But that's not an excuse for inaction. It merely shapes how we address these issues. So we attack these problems externally from the recruiting angle, making sure we reach underrepresented communities and populations in a broad and inclusive recruitment program for all job categories, with an increased focus on higher occupational categories such as public safety, technical, and professional occupations. And we attack it internally through establishing and enforcing best hiring practices and through effective and consistent and open upward mobility and career development programs. These are some of the very areas that the CSI project teams are working on. And it's important to note, and as I think as Chairman Pan said earlier, this is all occurring against the backdrop of an aging workforce that's moving rapidly into retirement. So some see that as a challenge. I see it as an opportunity. It's a timely opportunity because we're going to be hiring employees in droves over the coming years to get it right and really address some of these challenges. So with that, I'll conclude my comments, and I'm happy to take any questions the committee members may have.
Good morning, Chairman Bonta, Dr. Pan in your absence, Reggie Jones Sawyer, Ms. Waldron. And I also want to thank my coalition partners who are here with me, and my partner, Secretary Batcher and Richard. I want to point out that last year when we did this hearing, we were in a much smaller room, a little closer together. So it feels really good to know that this has been a priority. We've gotten a bigger room. We have more people here, because I think that this is a very important topic and things that we have to work on. Local 1000 is the largest union representing state employees in California. We represent 9 of the 21 bargaining units, and I'll venture to say that you cannot step into any state department and not run into somebody that I represent. So it's through that lens that I'm making my testimony. I just want to frame my thoughts on this just a little bit. Efforts to improve the state's workforce will require an investment, and we should be clear about that. However, it doesn't always mean that everything we do will have a high cost, but we should know that it is an investment. I believe that if something is important, you're going to put money behind it. If you don't put money behind it, it's not really important, and we're just doing words, and I hope that we're not just doing words. The state is working on a long-term plan, but we should also look at short-term plans as well, and what small changes we can make in the next 6 to 12 months to make these improvements. As this hearing suggests, we should absolutely be looking to incorporate EEO practices in the planning efforts by the state to build a 21st century workforce. And I believe that we will achieve more by working together inside and outside of the working groups. For example, we participate in joint labor management work groups to improve reasonable accommodation process within state service and increase the number of persons with disabilities who are in state service. I also want to say, before going much further, while I think it is absolutely important as we focus on our workforce of the future, we should not forget the workforce that we have today. I got to tell you, especially on my birthday, I cringe when I hear about the aging state workforce, of which I'm a part on both counts. And so, and I think it's important that we just don't lose that piece of the focus. I have long been an advocate for the things that we need to do to modernize our workforce. It doesn't happen on its own. That is why we strongly support the effort by Secretary Batcher to build a 21st century workforce, and we are happy to be part of those work groups, not just part of them. We are actually partners in those work groups, invited in on the front end. It makes a difference, and it makes us understand the seriousness of the administration's efforts to revamp things like job classifications, management training, recruitment, orientation, employee training, mentoring, and other issues that's going to help move our workforce forward, in addition to looking at technology, right, which has been brought forth. The state does not have the best technology background. We have found that the state over the years has neglected EEO programs and EEO opportunities, and that gets in the way of hiring a diverse workforce and providing opportunity for current state employees. And as a thought, though, as we look at that, so in department strategic plans, we throw around the words like, hiring people of color and hiring people that look like the community and everything else. But departments typically don't have plans that include organizational equity and inclusion, right? And it is a way to think about things, because you can throw around all the words that you want, but sometimes people have biases that they're not even aware of. Right? I mean, the reality is like hires like most of the time. And you can have the most progressive people coming from the very best place, but because these things aren't looked at in a real way and they're not taught and we're not deliberate about them, we wind up with a workforce that is not diverse. And I think that the intersection of EEO and civil service improvements is important to talk about. We have to do a better job about targeting and hiring women and people of color, not just in entry-level jobs, but in the managerial jobs also, in the CEA appointments. You really have to look at that. We have to make sure that we're doing all the right things. We have to make sure that we're providing training programs for our people who come in entry-level jobs, the ability to be able to move up. One of the things that we focus on at Local 1000 is upward mobility for people in lower classifications. We strongly support the program that exists to help move LVNs into RNs. It is a win-win for not only the LVNs, but it's a win-win for the state because they already have a committed workforce that will be even more committed to the state because they've helped them move up. In our contract, we have language that provides for account techs to be able to work with the state and become accountants for the state. Again, it's a win-win. It's a way to provide upward mobility, but these programs don't get used in the way that they should. We also do things out in the community. We're in a coalition, Voice, in Fresno. It's a faith-based coalition, but it's focused on getting people hired on the high-speed rail project. What we have found in Fresno is they have a lot of people there. It's one of the most economically disadvantaged places in the state. But the people can't even apply for the apprenticeship programs. And so we've come in with our faith-based coalition to create a program that will teach the people the skills so that they can get into the apprenticeship program. And in addition, the soft skills that are necessary to help you not only get a job, but keep a job. And so I think that these things will be helpful. There's not going to be any one magic bullet or any one way to get all of this done. I think the state should strongly consider funding additional apprenticeship programs. When we look at Caltrans, right, it's heavily populated by engineers, but most of the work doesn't need to be done by engineers. And we should be figuring out how we employ more technical folks to do the work, right? It's, again, a win-win for the state. And it's a cheaper way to get the work done and a more responsible way from a taxpayer's perspective to get the work done. And as we talk about, I'm trying to move fast and not take up your time, I wanted to just briefly touch on the upward mobility programs. In our contract, we have language that says that each department is supposed to maintain an upward mobility program, have an upward mobility coordinator, and make sure all of this exists. But what we don't have, and I think that this is the part that misses, is we don't have a way to hold the departments accountable. It's one thing to say, oh, we're going to have somebody of this title. But if you have not really invested in those programs, if you're not really looking at moving your people up, then it's just words on a piece of paper. So there has to be a way to provide accountability for that, or maybe reward departments that have a strong and vibrant upward mobility program that they can show by the numbers that they have, or reward departments in the budget that do invest in organizational equity and inclusion programs, because that's the only way you're going to get people to do more than just pay lip service to the concepts and the things that we're talking about. So I just think I'm glad that this committee meets. I think it's important that we continue down the path of creating diversity in our workforce in the state of California, that we look at the technology, that we reach out to millennials and know that our workforce is going to look different. Millennials are not baby boomers or not Gen Xers. They think, I have a millennial committee in the local, and I'm constantly surprised and astounded, not only by how smart they are, but by the things that they do. I have found out this week that I am intergenerational by the millennials, so I don't know what that means. I assumed it meant something good. I'm hoping it meant something good. But at any rate, I just think that we've just got to do better. And we've got to do better more than just words. But we have to put some resources behind the things that we're doing.
Thank you to all three of our presenters on this panel. Any questions or comments from members of the committee? Ms. Waldron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be brief, but I've written so many notes, so bear with me. Just to start off, regarding the developmental disabilities folks, I can't remember which committee I was in, but I supported wholeheartedly a bill, I believe it was Senator Hancock had, about instead of having people with developmental disabilities always be forced into taking a test before they get hired, actually be able to do work training, on-the-job training, maybe an internship type of thing or something like that, in order to segue into state employment, because sometimes a test is just not something that can be done. So I thought that was a really good out-of-the-box type of way of looking at things. And, as was mentioned, how this testing goes on, and I can say, just to back up what was said years ago, probably 30 years ago or more, I took a civil service test for the post office and was hired. My brother and I both took it. And it was the same thing. You show up, you get a card first, and you show up, and it's, all these people. You wait in line, you get checked in, you take a test in a big room, then you go away, and then weeks, maybe a month later, you get another card, and you have to show up and get, another, whatever it is, either an interview or a medical or whatever, and then you wait, and you don't hear it. Then you get another little card, and, I'm sure it's the same way now that it was then, everything through the mail. And, just to show how backward we are, and we really need, I thought California was going to be progressive. I mean, when we look at our public safety codes, last year I had a bill that just updated the technology codes because folks are, hacking computer systems now. That's a crime. But the way our penalties and our criminal codes were written, it was about computer mainframes and floppy disks. It just wasn't even relative to, voice over internet protocol and things we're doing now. So I really like the fact that we can focus. I think that could be a huge positive impact to, the goals we're talking about just by updating technology and how we communicate to young people. Let's see. The digital discussions are all really good. Education is a huge component. And a lot of times it's that technical training and the apprenticeships. I think that's a great concept to, get that out into the communities. And it's really having a physical presence too, being there, letting people see role models in the community and educating them. My parents were immigrants. They didn't know anyone. My mom's family didn't speak the language. She went to college. She learned how to speak on her own without help. But a lot of folks don't have that, ability and just to have the access. So I think, having people in the community, maybe the folks who are working for the state, maybe they can help and segue that. I just think that's really important. And last but not least, and Reggie knows, I have a passion for trying to help previously incarcerated people move into the job force. And in my business, we've hired people who have been in prison, and it's always a problem. And, trying to figure out how can we work, before they get released so that they can have a stable life afterwards. And I didn't know if there was any comments on that. Thank you.
So I'll try to respond to the last part, which I think relative to hiring of persons who were previously incarcerated, I mean, the rehabilitation side of that, of course, rests with the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation or at the county level if they are coming out of a county facility. But I believe for the vast majority of state jobs, we don't ask that question. It's only for jobs that require a background check and security type clearance where those things are a consideration.
I didn't mean on the application. I was just meaning how do we work with the correctional department?
Oh, for like job
maybe
readiness.
programs that actually work with employers. Because I've been on the employer end, and I see the problems with communication between parole, between just the courts, things that are happening with the employee. How can we as a unit, the employer, the state, the parole, everyone work together to help those people? Because once they can stabilize, then it would really be a help.
Another factor in that is making sure that they have strong and vibrant vocational programs that do include that component of it's not just you're going to the program to get time off, but it's a whole body approach that they are working with employers and they are doing, and they're tracking the recently released inmate beyond just we got you a job, but track them and support them for a year beyond that to make sure that they can stay.